Welcome everyone to day 2 of our History Scholars, and Casey is going to get us started. Thank you all for waking up bright and early and sacrificing your sleep. Okay. All right, so here goes Casey. You ready? Really? I got you. You want me to give you like a signal? At what time? At 5 minutes? Give you a thumbs up. All right. All right, here we go.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to my scholar's presentation. I would first and foremost like to thank Ms. Long and the history program for guiding my research, as well as the Williston Library faculty. With that being said, today I'll be examining the question of how immigration has influenced American national self-image, specifically through the national dish, the hot dog and hamburger. The reason why I'm interested in this is throughout my childhood, I grew up going to military events. My father and mother, I can remember going to deployments and squadrons, 4th of July parties, and there's always food being present, specifically hamburgers and hot dogs. I began to wonder this summer, why is that? Why are the hot dog and hamburger always there, when really their origins aren't even American? So kind of led me to research of this project. Why I think this is important because while many countries have clear national dishes that reflect their own local ingredients and customs, like Korea's bulgogi, Austria's Wiener Schnitzel, and Ireland's Irish stew, the United States is vastly different. America's national dish isn't tied to one culture or tradition, it's a melting pot just of its people. And that's precisely what I'm exploring today, how immigration shaped two foods that became symbols of American identity. To start with, just look at the immigration history of America. Following the Revolution, people from all over the world began to come to America seeking opportunity, escaping famine, job shortages, and religious persecution. Between 1870 and 1920 alone, there were 26 million immigrants arriving in the United States, mostly from European countries such as Germany, Ireland, England, Italy, and many others. As a result of heavy immigrant flow into New York, it was dubbed the Golden Doors to America, a symbol of freedom and hope, but also Pennsylvania served as a major gateway for German immigration. Well, there's a little back in time, by 1760, up to 60% of Pennsylvania's population had German roots. These immigrants from Germany didn't bring just themselves, they also brought their food traditions. And that's kind of the start of the spread of how these two items grew in the culture. So many of these German immigrants continued their professions that they carried in Germany, such as butchers, bakers, and farmers. Many of the butchering techniques continued to what they are today. They laid the foundation across the Northeast of America and the staple of the hot dog and hamburger. However, even though these foods are German, it is immigration to America to thank for what is truly what these things are today, and how they're a symbol of national pride. So, we'll start with the origin of the hot dog. The claim where it's from is widely disputed amongst Germany and Austria. It is believed to come from Frankfurt, Germany, as the Frankenfurter Wursten sausage. It's kind of because someone calls it Frank. Whereas Coburg, Germany, also credits the butcher Johann Dürrenhader, who supposedly made Little Dog sausage, also known as the Dachshund sausage. We also have Austria, who claims that the people of Vienna, also known as Wiener, also the Wiener sausage, stuff like that, and how these claims show how it focuses on the sausage rather than the actual hot dog itself, which is a more American thing, was adding the bread to the sausage. So that brings us to Charles Feldman. So in the 1860s, vendors started to pop up all around New York selling sausages on rolls with sauerkraut. And then in 1871, Charles Feldman opened up the first ever hot dog stand on Coney Island. In his first year of service, sold 3,700 hot dogs, which seems relatively low, but for 1871 and low, kind of New York wasn't what it is today. It's pretty relatively good. From this day forward, it established itself as an American street food staple and gave rise to many other hot dog stands around. You can go to Times Square nowadays and you'll see probably actually more than 4 hot dog stands out around Times Square. 6 or 7. So then here's where the hot dog really takes hold in American customs and traditions. Baseball. Dubbed America's favorite pastime, It really established itself in 1893 when German immigrant Chris von he owner of the St. Louis Browns, now the St. Louis Cardinals. He owned a bar in St. Louis, but also owned the baseball team. And through he combined his enterprises and essentially had his own bars in the baseball stadium. And then through that, hot dogs became an inseparable part of baseball. And it's estimated that today, there are over 20 million hot dogs that are eaten and sold every single season of baseball, with about 8,000 hot dogs consumed per game. But then, I would say the more patriotic example of how hot dogs came to rise to fame was through Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest, which actually probably is the most patriotic thing, because in 1916, Fort Wayne won for who was most patriotic. And through that, the hot dog was the most patriotic thing they could eat. So they gathered in a group and ate the hot dogs faster to figure out who they were. Now, in today's standards, how on the 4th of July, our most American holiday we have, 40,000 people come to visit it in person, and 2 million watch it on TV. But what this is, I think most of you guys probably know, Joey Chestnut holds the world record for hot dogs eaten, 73 hot dogs in 10 minutes, it's about 13,000 calories. It's pretty impressive. All right, so the next part comes down to the hamburger. This, I would say, has more disputed origins than the hot dog. So it's kind of known that it is a German background. However, it's kind of widely believed it's also an American dish, which is more accurate, as you can see by the graphs. The left side is the United States survey, and the right side is the German survey. As you can see, the U.S. kind of holds out on its own of 39% from the U.S. and 55% in Germany. The reason that this somewhat of confusion is the term Hamburg. People relate the name kind of similar to Frankfurt, at the hamburger, as part of hamburger. Really has nothing to really do with that. More of the hamburger steak, which is a minced beef dish served in Germany. And then when it was brought to America, that's when it was created, added into bread at both sides, and served into the hamburger sandwich. Which the hamburger sandwich was created by Lee Lassen at the Louis Lunch in New Haven, Connecticut. Claims to be the very first one in 1900. However, looking back in time, an 1894 advertisement in the Shriner newspaper claims to also have hamburger steak sandwiches earlier than that. But the true claim to fame of the hamburger came in 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, where over the span of 7 months, 2 million people were subject to the new creation of the hamburger. That's what really came through itself in American culture. And then following post-World War II was a big part in boosting both the hamburger and the hot dog. As following World War II, there was a big change from the life kind of closer to cities into a more suburb-based United States lifestyle. This was fueled by the GI Bill, which was a government incentive to pay for veterans following the start of World War II. And in this time, grilling became a national pastime. And obviously, on grills, you got hamburgers, hot dogs. So the hamburger became a staple of backyard cookouts, barbecues, and celebrations, often again relating, like the hot dog contest, to 4th of July. And then, through this shift of food culture, then you have the rise of fast food, which is arguably very American, very center point of what we call, American dining. So between 1948 and 1969, chains like McDonald's, In-N-Out, Burger King, and Wendy's began to spread across the country. However, the forerunner was with McDonald's, who in the early 1940s wanted to implement a assembly line system, which is a very much American system, wanted to reinvent the food culture and help produce burgers fast and cheap. So in 1940, implemented the system. It cost only 15 cents per burger, and you could feed an entire family for $2.50. While that's not the case now, back then it showed the affordability and convenience, and that helped in the hot dog and the hamburger into a cultural icon, as it wanted to show how Americans, we can live sustainably, afford to live, and how, as a country, we were a economically prosperous country through providing cheap food, also food that could feed an entire family, and food that could support the system. And then even in today's standards, there is a push for patriotism with the hamburger and how fast food continue to influence American politics. Recently, in 2025, Steak and Shake rolled out a patriotic campaign. I said they wanted the most patriotic fast food place in America, so they rolled out an incentive to put the biggest American flag in front of all the stores that they could, as well as a partnership with RFK in the term making flying oil tallow again. Obviously, this is all part of RFK's kind of healthy America plan, and so Steak and Shake wanted to capitalize on their incentive to be the most patriotic by playing into that. While it sounds humorous and it sounds kind of, I don't want to say sketchy, but somewhat sketchy, it reveals how deeply intertwined the hamburger has made itself in American culture through all these years. So what do I think? I think that based on the culture, I think it's important that we look at how we got here. I mean, in the current state of our government and political tensions, we look back at immigration, we see really a lot of bad, but also I think it's important to look into the good that's come in shaping the nation and shaping our country and everything that surrounds what we view as prideful to our country. And yeah. If anyone has any questions, I'm going to ask.
Thank you. If I understood you right, you were saying that the hamburger and hot dog sort of rose to prominence in St. Louis, right around the St. Louis World's Fair. And I was wondering if you looked at the demographics of St. Louis at the time and to see if there was either a majority sort of German immigrant population, or if, sort of why that national dish and not, say, an Italian or an Irish dish rose to prominence.
Yeah, so I don't have exact kind of figures on that, but based on the point about the baseball team and the St. Louis Browns that was owned by a German immigrant, I assume that, based on research I do know, that there's going to be a large amount of German population in St. Louis at the time, which to your point probably represents why it was so popular then, rather than an Italian dish. Jordan?
Did you look into apple pie since you're talking about American foods? And did you see how impactful that was to society?
So much to Ms. Clump's dismaying, I did not look into apple pie. I know that was a big point she made. I just ended up kind of focusing on just the two items. I did kind of delve into a little bit of Thanksgiving a little bit, look at kind of the history of like the turkey and stuffing, but I think I want to focus really on these two items just to do the similarities, so I don't have anything other than hot dog and hamburger, really. Shivers.
Kind of related to that question. First of all, this was so interesting, so thank you. It made me think about the foods that we eat in a really unique way. And having lived in Texas, there are a lot of German immigrants, and there are a lot of foods like kolaches that you can find at like every corner. It had me kind of thinking about the impact of food specifically in that region. So I was thinking about the how of your project. So did you pick the immigrant group and then find the food, or did you pick the food and then trace it back?
So originally, so it takes a little further back. So this project, I wanted to focus on kind of like multiple countries, kind of multiple dishes, and I realized that it's probably better to focus on a country first. So I picked the United States, so I really wanted to look into focusing on what we call American foods. So yeah, really the foods came first, and then it was looking at how these foods ended up in America. That's kind of came from like the heavily German side of the project.
Mm-hmm.
This one.
Did you trace even farther back and think about how they came to Germany?
Yeah, so I had I included my script, but in around the 1200s, I believe it was when Hamburg was established way back. There was a large cattle presence. I believe it was a large cattle that kind of helped grow the butchery became very popular because there was a long understanding of German butchers, a lot of German meat cultures outside of just beef to help kind of grow the butchering aspect, and as obviously that was carried into the United States as the speaker. That's kind of only really answer that question. Janelle?
I'll see if I can frame this question on, having just gotten back from Hong Kong and having about a 30-hour foot day. But it's pretty cool. I really enjoy this because culture and food and countries and identity go so tightly together. Did you look towards the future and kind of the end of, towards organically produced meat as opposed to the end of slaughtering meats, which hamburger and hot dogs both rely on?
I did not look into that. I don't think it's something I would like to probably research a little bit more, especially as there's rise of like synthetic meats as well. I think that'd be interesting to look at kind of how things will shift over time.
Thanks.
All right, we're gonna take a minute break if anyone wants a drink while we get Lauren set up. Or do you want to use your? We're gonna try to plug theirs in. And it should work. There's no reason why it shouldn't work. There used to be three. So if you really think about it. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I was like,
Is all the 13 hours.
thank you guys.
But you're
Which is like,
that's necessary. But after a while, you're like, this is just my vacation. I'm sitting.
I think the worst part, at least for me, traveling is like getting in the Uber after having been on.
Yeah, oh, I know, right, that,
All right, I think we're ready to hear from Lauren.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren, and I want to start off by thanking everyone here for coming today and taking your Wednesday morning to come and support our projects. Because I know that listening to high schoolers talk about histories that really the first thing we want to do when we wake up, so we really all do appreciate it. This trimester, I researched the similarities between the modern phenomenon that we know as cancel culture and a tale, unfortunately, as old as time, which is misogyny. We hear it all the time, but we might not all understand it, and by we, I mean the parents. The phrase cancel. Hollywood princesses like Lively to YouTube stars like Colin Ballinger or Ruby Frank, to even political figures like Hillary Clinton, they've all found themselves in the blinding spotlight of cancel culture at some point. But what does it really mean to be canceled? Urban Dictionary, the go-to online source for any Gen Z term, phrase, or slang, gives the best definition I can think of. A term mostly used by Twitter to ensure civil judgment and civil punishment for actions by an individual that has done something wrong. Now, I personally am really chronically online. TikToks, Instagram Reels, Snapchat all take up a good amount of my time, a habit that made doing this really hard. And a pattern I've noticed through my social media expertise is the unbalanced effect cancel culture has on women compared to men. I don't think that this pattern, unlike the term cancel culture, is necessarily new or a modernly emerged pattern. I think it has evidently existed since forever. So the question I asked while conducting my project this trimester is, what does cancel culture's effect on women reveal about the inherent, historically rooted, misogynistic prejudices of society? And I know it's a lot to ask, but bear with me because I need to get to 10 minutes. Thanksgiving is coming up, and when hearing that holiday, some of us might think of pilgrims. A prominent trend within cancel culture is the harsh impact it has on economically, socially, and or politically powerful women. What does this have to do with the Pilgrims, you might ask? Despite the completely different period they lived in, the Pilgrims had their own tactic of silencing women, their own cancel culture, if you will. In 1626, English Puritans settled in the Native American area of Nankee in Massachusetts, and they renamed it Salem, which means City of Peace. It's really cute, but we all know that that city was anything but peaceful, because 70 years later, Sarah Osborne was one of the first 3 women to be formally accused of witchcraft. She was a recently remarried widow of higher social standing, and there were many factors besides possibly actually using witchcraft that people believe led to her accusation. After her husband, Robert Prince, died, she married Alexander Osborne, making her Sarah Osborne. But before she married him, she moved in with him, which is a big no-no for Puritan women. Yikes, Sarah. She was then involved in legal battles over her late husband's property and inheritance until the trials were inconveniently paused because she was accused of inflicting witchcraft on Anne Putnam, the daughter of Robert Prince's brother-in-law and executor of his will. Coincidence? No, I don't think so. She died in prison on May 10th at 49 years old, so she never even made it to her trial. And she was one of the 104 women arrested, 25 tried and convicted, and if she hadn't died before the trial, probably would have been one of the 14 executed for witchcraft and stealing. A widow who shared a home with a man pre-marriage and attempted to legally win some money and property wasn't the Puritans' idea of the perfect woman. And it seems that at the time, a combination of economically high social status and unconventional traits and behaviors, and doing anything that strayed from the norm of women at the time, was the exact criteria that would earn you an accusation of witchcraft. Any woman who did not commit to the role society wanted her to play and still held some power was quickly attacked by the people she threatened or made uneasy. And I think that statement perfectly encapsulates women affected by cancel culture or major public disapproval today. Now, the Salem witch trials are an example far from the world we know now, thankfully. So I want to paint a picture we've all actually seen before. In the summer of 2022, the issue on the table of every single social media platform and news outlet was the Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp trial. I'm not going to explain the whole thing because you can just go watch it on Netflix somehow, although I wouldn't. But essentially, Johnny Depp, who you might be familiar with, tried to sue his ex-wife Amber Heard for defamation when she wrote an article in the Washington Post asserting that she was a domestic abuse survivor, although she never even mentioned his name. Now, there's not really any ethical black and white in this case. I don't want to go out on a limb and claim that I think one of them was right or wrong. But I will let the statistics and facts that I found speak for the favoritism and imbalance that I believe heavily influenced the outcome of this case. An NPR article on this trial says that a 7-member jury found that Depp was entitled to $10 million in compensatory damages. At the end of the case, he was given $10.35 million, even though Virginia, which is the state that the trial took place in, Virginia state law caps punitive damages at $3,500,000. But courts are objective, right? The point of juries is that they make an unbiased decision based on the information they're given. And we know that courts always do their jobs right. Well, at the time, #Justice for Johnny Depp had received nearly 7 million views across TikTok. As you can see on the screen, there are some comments that kind of show support for Depp and bias against Amber Heard. That hashtag is also regularly trending on Twitter. And another quote from the article says that supercuts from trial footage, which are edited to make Amber Heard's accusations seem unfounded, were circulating around social media. On the other hand, Heard was the subject of online hate and vitriol. She saw throngs of people inside and outside the courtroom supporting Depp, with some holding signs like sayings like, "Burn the witch," which is interesting because there's that word again. Is it possible that the juries were 100% not influenced by anything happening outside that courtroom? In 2020, Depp attempted to sue the UK newspaper called The Sun for a story that called him a wife beater, but he lost that case because the judge found that story to be mostly true. So Amber Heard's accusation of domestic abuse against him wasn't the first of its kind. Still, it was her who was the target of every single social media and news attack, whose testimony was made out to be unreasonable. Why? Maybe it's the influence of Johnny Depp's beloved characters that we've all grown up with. Maybe Amber Heard's testimony really was suspicious or weak or crazy. Or just maybe, as a female accuser, Amber Heard's voice was never going to rally or gather support and belief against a man. Regardless of how adored he was by the public, which in this case was very, Johnny Depp's gender was the nail in the coffin that ensured that his accuser's point of view was never going to be sympathized with. And that's a phenomenon we've all seen more than once. So within cancel culture is the predisposition to unfairly blame women for wrongdoings that men receive far lesser consequences for. Still, the most impactful way I think cancel culture reveals misogyny is the long-term impact it has on women. I couldn't come up with an intro deserving enough of this last infamous example and answer my central question, so I decided to let this Vanity Fair article do it. She tried public appearances, she tried being reclusive, she tried leaving the country, and she tried finding a job. But the epic humiliation ritual of 1998 has followed her every day. Does anyone have an idea of who this might be about? On January 26, 1998, President Bill Clinton made a statement that a lot of us remember, or a lot of us who were alive remember more than any bill or legislation he passed. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Monica Lewinsky. Spoiler alert, he did. I found that this example is the one my friends and peers, when I would ask them about it, knew least about. Probably because it happened a little too early to trend on TikTok and is too disreputable to be covered in U.S. history and government textbooks. But what actually happened in the Oval Office between 1995 and 1997 is not what I want to talk about. At least not right now, because it's actually really interesting. But what's important is everything that happened after. As described in this article by Monica Lewinsky herself, at a 2001 program in New York in front of a crowd of hundreds of people, someone asked Monica Lewinsky, and excuse my language, how does it feel to be America's premier blowjob queen? Mind you, this was 3 years after the scandal was revealed. This woman's first job out of college was interning at the White House. She graduated with a master's degree in social psychology from the London School of Economics. And despite all her achievements, she couldn't go anywhere or do anything without the discussion of her past. Now, she was completely in the wrong for that mistake, and I'm not condoning the affair or the role she played in it. But I also won't disregard the role Clinton played in it, although it seems that a good amount of society does. Months after this affair had been exposed, Lewinsky's parents didn't let her shower with the door closed because they were afraid she would commit suicide under the nation's bullying. This affair has and always will be a dent in President Clinton's resume, a story that opposing politicians used against him back then, and a story that we still make fun of today. But it never resulted in an American mob attack, collective degradation, or years of mental and emotional turmoil for him. In the majority of Americans' minds, he'll always just be the 42nd President of the United States. Not, and these are not my words, America's BJ Queen, that vixen, the unstable stalker, or the dimwit floozy, which all refer to Monica Lewinsky. And that difference in treatment is not whatever happened behind the Oval Office's closed doors. That difference in treatment is exactly what ties together the witch hunts of Salem, Massachusetts, a controversial celebrity legal battle, and the term cancel culture. In the 17th century, when a woman did something everyone else disapproved of, they did publicly drown her or burn her at the stake. Nowadays, we just leave nasty comments on social media and degrade her publicly and destroy her chances of moving on from her mistake. And I didn't research these 3 events to emphasize what everyone already knows, that misogyny and sexism exist, because that wouldn't really be a very interesting project. When we think of the equality between men and women in every aspect, we like to think that we've made substantial progress, and we have. But the ideas that pit society against women and their power and achievements still exist today, one of the biggest examples being cancel culture, something we are subconsciously influenced by every single day. But I think that if we persistently question and maintain awareness of our own thoughts, instead of believing whatever the popular culture, opinion, or word of mouth is, we can get closer to making misogynistic, patriarchal, and oppressive ideology things of the past. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
First of all, your delivery was so awesome. awesome and excellent, and you're so funny, and I think that really brought a lot of, I don't know, life to your presentation. So I can't help but notice in the cases you talked about, the presence of like the scrutiny of like women's sexuality in all of them. So I was just wondering, maybe could you speak to the relevance of that, and as it relates to what you're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. In my paper, that was a huge part of my thesis, is that the two biggest things that we seem to scrutinize women for when men do it all the time is being proud of their sexuality and expressing a strong opinion. And if you look at really any case where a woman in the spotlight is publicly shamed, and compare that to like a case where a man did the same thing, those two things I find are always going to be in it. Some other stories I had considered using but didn't were Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake Super Bowl wardrobe malfunction, where I forget exactly what it was, but she had the audacity to like accidentally show some cleavage. And,
On accident.
Yeah.
No, he pulled it.
Yeah, he pulled it, and nobody said anything about him, but it was a huge part of her career from then on. And so yeah, definitely in my research I found that was a huge part of like a huge cause of public scrutinization. Mr. Hill.
I agree with everything about the plaudits you got. It was a great presentation, and I love the irony. Japan has its first female head of state. Mexico currently president. I think of Angela Merkel in Germany, way back before you were born, Margaret Thatcher in England. We still yet to have a female head of state. Do you think any of that absence plays into the larger kind of top-down cancel culture with the point you're making? Do you think any of that, will it change if a female becomes elected president?
Yeah, I think it's not something that's going to change overnight, and it's something that's influenced by like the things we see every day, things like not having a lot of female political leaders and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that not having a huge female public leader is something that definitely contributes to it, because it kind of enforces people's idea that maybe women aren't allowed to do these things. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, and it's like these little, like obviously it's a huge present thing, but it's these like little institutions that enforce these ideas that make women get publicly shamed a lot worse than men for the same things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Ferd?
I'm interested in the way that in two of the incidences of the Salem witch trials and then the Monica Lewinsky, there was no internet, but there was still the feverish feel of hatred directed at these women, in the sense that it was sort of viral, right? Particularly in Salem and that kind of thing. I wonder if it's not the internet that causes that viral, exponential, shame-building situation, then what is it? I mean, we obviously see it on a larger platform now, if everyone's commenting and whatever. But what do you think that element is that causes, I am, upset with this woman, and then it, balloons in that way?
That's a great question, and it's also interesting because at the time Monica Lewinsky's case, the internet was kind of just growing to its peak, but it wasn't where it is right now, obviously. And I would say that like the absence of social media is made up for the fact that we so easily believe that a woman's in the wrong. So we didn't, at the time of the Salem witch trials, I don't think, they didn't need social media because they already had this internal predisposition to blame these women. Like they didn't need social media to say like, hey, like let's all jump on this woman, because it was just easy for them to. And a huge part of that was the fact that for that period, the Puritans in that area were losing a lot of land. They were not having a great time with their settlement, and they couldn't ask England for help because they just fled from there. And a lot of historians say that they were facing like mass hysteria, and this term anomie, which is kind of just a synonym for hysteria. And so blaming women kind of made it easier for all of them to find their place in where they were, because they were so confused by like the lack of rules and set institutions, that when this opportunity to kind of shift blame and anxiety elsewhere popped up, I think that was like equivalent to the role social media plays today in publicly shaming women. Yeah.
You had the examples of Clinton and Depp, and one thing I would note about those two examples is that they're more, in some ways they're more famous and more powerful of the two contesting people. And I know that Janet Jackson and Kimberly Clinton might be an example of this, but I'm wondering if you came across any examples of where the women were clearly the more well-known, the more powerful, but still was not protected by that power, still was like taken down or canceled more than the man.
Yeah, one of the ones I can think of, and it was also one of the ones I was considering researching, is I think last winter, the feud between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively on the It Ends With Us set regarding her behavior during the press tour, and I think it was revealed that he was actually running a smear campaign against her. I considered researching that one, but I didn't, just because there were so many other factors at play. But in that case, yeah, I think we can all agree that Blake Lively is a lot more well known than Justin Baldoni, and it was still very, very easy for him to use people's misogynistic prejudices and also the tool of social media and the internet to immediately get people to dislike her. And he used a lot of her behaviors, obviously during the press tour, and it was so easy for him to redirect her behavior and say that, oh, it's because of this, it's because she doesn't care about domestic violence. And yeah, despite her being a lot more powerful and famous than him, she was still brought down so easily. And even when the idea that he was running the smear campaign against her came out, people refused to believe that he would do that. So yeah, that's a case where I think the power dynamic is a little different. Ms. Cole?
Did you come across anything about the fallout in the Clinton Lewinsky case for Hillary Clinton, who was his wife at the time, and during that having been alive then, I remember she also had some negative press. She was completely not involved, and potentially the fallout in her political campaigns later.
Yeah, in the article that I put up there by Monica Lewinsky, she mentioned how one of the reasons she stepped forward during this time was because Hillary Clinton's political career was kind of on the rise. And one of the things she said that was interesting to me was that the more she hid it, the more it would just become a bigger presence in Clinton's campaign. So it definitely had some consequences there. And another huge thing that I considered was this idea of obligatory feminism. When does someone's actions cross the line? Are we still obliged to protect this woman because she's a woman, or do we just stay out of it? So that kind of feminist aspect, and just the stigma around even talking about the affair during Clinton's rise in her career, that definitely had some huge impacts on her campaign. And yeah.
Thank you. All right, you've got Charlie set up. Yeah. Do you want to use your computer?
Because we leave at 11:15. You did so well.
It's also so interesting. Are you going to
Dude, thank you for inviting me. That was awesome.
Yes. Okay, this still works. Right, they're talking about Kanye. Or Kanye West.
Okay. All right, we are ready for our final presentation for today. All right.
Hi everyone, my name is Charlie, I'm a senior, and first I want to thank all of you for coming to my History Scholars presentation. For the past couple months, my peers and I have been working very hard to research and compile information on a topic of our choice, and your support means a lot to all of us. Before I begin, I just want to get a brief show of hands. Who here is familiar with the Israel-Palestine conflict? Mostly all of you, I'm guessing. Who here is familiar with the term Zionism? Well, if you're unfamiliar with the term, lucky for you, that is what my presentation will be covering. Zionism is a term that is oftentimes thrown around in our current political climate, but not everyone who uses it has a concrete understanding of its meaning and history. I am here to give context to this word and explain why it is so controversial yet misunderstood. My interest in this topic stems from the fact that my father was born in Israel, and growing up I had some basic foundational knowledge of the conflict. In recent years, I have started doing my own research and investigating sources from both sides. Researching current events has prompted me to investigate the past to better understand the origins of this conflict. Zionism, in short, means the support of establishing a Jewish state. The essential question I aim to answer with my presentation is the following. What are the origins of the Zionist movement, and how have its goals and actions changed or stayed consistent over time? I will answer this question by looking at the key time periods above. Firstly, I will look at medieval Europe when a lot of these anti-Semitic stereotypes and tropes emerged. Then I will skip forward to the 19th century with the birth of Zionism, then to the 1930s and 40s with the Holocaust, which was obviously a pivotal moment in Jewish history, and then to the establishment of Israel in 1948, and lastly the modern day and looking towards the future. The answer to the first part of my question, that is, what are the origins of the Zionist movement and how did it lead to the establishment of Israel, is that the Zionist movement emerged in response to centuries of pervasive anti-Semitism in Europe. Many famous and well-respected European figures that we learned about in history class preached hatred against Jews. For example, Martin Luther, the famous founder of Protestantism, was a raging anti-Semite. In 1543, he published a 65,000-word essay entitled On the Jews and Their Lives. The stereotypes that Luther outlines, that Jews are lying, deceitful, and suspicious, only mounted in popularity over time, causing Jews to self-isolate to avert persecution, and inspiring anti-Semitic conspiracies such as blood libel, which is pictured above. Through frequent and violent attacks on communities called pogroms and discriminatory laws, authorities and society in Europe made quite clear that they did not want Jews in Europe. Even though Jews had been living there for thousands of years, Europeans viewed them as foreigners that needed to be expelled. Jewish intellectuals began to ask themselves, will there ever be a place where Jews will be accepted? Thus, the possibility of a Jewish state, a haven where Jews could be free of anti-Semitism, was discussed. Those in favor of a Jewish state came to be called Zionist, and their movement was, as you can guess, Zionism. Theodor Herzl, who is here, is renowned as the father of Zionism. In 1896, he published his manifesto entitled The Jewish State, which outlined his plans for such a state. Herzl's fundamental belief was that, so long as anti-Semitism existed, assimilation would be impossible, and the only solution for the majority of Jews would be organized immigration to a state of their own. Herzl offered Palestine as a possible location for this proposed state. Palestine was historically the location of Judea, which was the homeland of Jews. In the Jewish state, Herzl paints Palestine as no man's land, the cusp of Western civilization, and a transition point between the civilized West and barbaric East, stereotypes about the Middle East that had been adopted by Europeans. Among Zionist thinkers in the 1930s and 40s, the Holocaust, the genocide of over 6 million Jews by the Nazis, emphasized the need for a Jewish state, and further confirmed Herzl's claim that Europe never was and never will be a safe place for Jews. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, there were large populations of Jews living in displaced persons, or DP camps, in Western Europe. Although DP camps provided Jews temporary refuge from the horrors of genocide, these camps were not intended for long-term residence. Most Jews do not want to return to their home countries, where their communities had been destroyed, their families killed, and their culture erased. Jews sought another option, a new homeland, a haven, an independent nation where Jews would no longer be a persecuted minority, but a liberated majority. To the Jews in the DP camps, Palestine represented that haven. Jewish immigration to Palestine skyrocketed during and after the Holocaust, and the first Jewish immigrants to Israel were mostly refugees and Holocaust survivors. The United Nations knew something had to be done regarding the influx of Jewish refugees from Europe, and in 1947 enacted a plan that split Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Zionist leaders eagerly accepted this plan, but leaders of Arab nations were not so enthusiastic to endorse it. Regardless, British occupation concluded and the formation of a Jewish state began. Pictured above is a map of Palestine before and after the United Nations partition plan. So that answers the first part of my question, which was regarding Zionism's origins and how it led to the creation of Israel. But how did that Zionism translate into the Zionism we see today, adopted by Israeli politicians like Benjamin Netanyahu and Naftali Bennett? Well, the answer to that is a bit more complicated. Some historians, scholars, and activists, some of whom consider themselves Zionist, argue that modern-day Zionism has strayed from its original ideals for this reason. The original Zionist movement was intended to be diplomatic and nonviolent. In fact, the use of force was commonly rejected because it was deemed non-Jewish. However, 19th and early 20th century proponents of Zionism did not anticipate the level of opposition, often violent opposition, from neighboring Arab states in response to the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. When faced with violent opposition, Israel has taken actions to defend itself, especially in response to the brutal October 7th attacks by the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas, where roughly 1,200 Israelis were killed, most of whom were civilians, and another 251 were taken hostage, the youngest being a 9-month-old baby who later died in captivity. In response, Israel has been waging war on Gaza for the past couple of years, attempting to dismantle Hamas. Many politicians and activists argue that the force Israel is using against Palestine is excessive, and that Palestinian civilians are bearing the brunt of the violence rather than Hamas members themselves. According to NPR, out of every 10 people in Palestine, 1 has been killed or injured in an Israeli strike. 9 are displaced. At least 3 have not eaten for days, and out of every 10 homes, 9 are wrecked. According to Gaza's health ministry, an estimated 68,000 Palestinians have been killed and another 170,000 have been wounded, which is roughly 11% of Gaza's population. UNICEF spokesman James Elder described to CBS News what he saw in a Gaza hospital, saying there was a boy bleeding out on the floor who apparently had been there for 5 hours. Then he was put on a stretcher, only for another child to be put in his place. Then I watched a little girl die. That's half an hour here in Gaza. According to the UN, as of January, at least 14,000 children have been killed in Palestine, and another 17,000 have been separated from their caregivers. Israeli politicians like Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the Prime Minister of Israel, and Naftali Bennett, who is the former Prime Minister and a very outspoken politician, have cited Zionism as a justification for the treatment of Palestinians. But as Israeli historian Anita Shapira puts it in her book, Land and Power, the Zionist Resort to Force, if someone had predicted to Herzl that the state he had envisioned would ultimately be established in blood and fire, and that its fate would rest on the point of the sword, the author of the Jewish state would undoubtedly have been repulsed and would have rejected the implications of this prophecy. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because the Israel-Palestine conflict is one of the most controversial and divisive issues facing our world today. It makes people very uncomfortable, and therefore, I think it is important to talk about. To facilitate informed discussions about this conflict, people must understand its history and origins. They must understand how and why the idea of a Jewish state emerged in the first place. Studying the past gives us a better understanding of the present and helps us assess where to go from here, which hopefully will take us closer to finally achieving peace after 80 years of brutal conflict. Thank you. Yeah, Chloe?
Your presentation was amazing and it was super interesting. I just had a question. What do you think that, like, in 2005, I think that was the year, Palestine voted, or like Gaza voted Hamas in, like, with like, and I just like, what do you think, how do you think that's contributed, like, to this issue? Like, I feel, like, I don't know if you researched
some of that, but I feel like that's like a very interesting aspect that's not really talked about. Yeah, Hamas sells a lot of propaganda to the Palestinian people and limits their resources to seeing perspectives from outside of Gaza. So I think that is a factor that has really contributed to them voting in Hamas. But we can see now there are demonstrations in Gaza that are against Hamas, that are calling for Hamas to be dismantled, and Hamas is rounding up some of those people and shooting them. So I think that the chokehold that Hamas has over the Gaza Strip is really disturbing, and that a lot of people are suffering because of their chokehold. Yeah, Mr. Johnson?
Hi, I was wondering if when the Zionist movement got started, was there any, I mean, not personal, but maybe other people around him who thought, well, two things, either like was the U.S. ever like considered like an option? There's clearly a lot of Jews being emigrated to. And then just historically, as you might remember, Brave New World, there was compared to Christians, the Islamic regions of the world were much, on the whole, kinder to Jews. Was there, I know things had evolved by that point in time, was there any consideration of actually just getting away from Christianity and maybe immigrating to Islamic regions?
Okay, yeah. So to answer the first part of your question, there was a lot, as we know, of immigration to the United States from Eastern European Jews, especially in the late 19th century and early 20th century. However, the lives of Jews when they first immigrated to the United States was definitely not easy. They were working factory jobs, a lot of them living in very inadequate conditions. So the United States was not considered ideal. And then as far as Islamic regions, so Mizrahi Jews and Sephardic Jews are the names of Jews that were living in Islamic countries. And even though on the whole Islamic countries were a little more tolerant than Europe, there were still like massacres of Jews in those countries, especially in Iraq. A lot of Iraqi Jews were, were murdered by the government there. So neither of those places were really considered for those reasons. Yeah?
I was wondering, like, it kind of relates to Chloe's question a little bit and what you said to that, but we know that democracy is a hard thing to achieve. We know that not all democracies are created equal, and we know that democracy is not oftentimes a perfect expression of what like the populace wants. So all those things considered, could you speak to like the level of democracy in both Palestine and Israel, and how do you think that contributes to the existence of the conflict today?
Yeah, I don't think there is democracy in Palestine, unfortunately. I think Hamas has completely taken control over Gaza, and I think that's a very upsetting reality. In terms of Israel, from my personal experience, there are a lot of Israelis who are very, very unhappy with the Netanyahu regime. There have been protests throughout Israel. People are trying to get him arrested for war crimes and for accusing him of rigging elections. So I think, although Israel aims to be more democratic than Palestine, and I think it is, there are still some flaws there that definitely have contributed to a person in power getting into office who is not doing a great job at all. So, yeah.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Yeah, Ms. Chambers?
I have two questions and they are not related. But I'll start with gratitude, so thank you for this presentation. I learned a lot. I was wondering, outside of now Israel, what were other areas that were being considered for a Jewish state? Because I know it wasn't just Israel, and from my understanding, I think they were not, there were other places around the globe. So I was wondering if you could speak to that. And I was wondering, you know, the state, like kind of the birthplace of Judaism, being an influential factor in the placement of Israel. That is a reason to bring people to Israel, but I was wondering if those other places were resistant to having Jewish populations in those other territories. And my second question, again, not related, this, as you mentioned, is a very divisive topic, and I was wondering what your thoughts are as to how people can have productive conversations around this really contentious conflict.
Absolutely, those are both amazing questions.
Thank you.
To answer your first question, I did cover it in a large chunk of my paper, but the other main country that was being proposed for a new Jewish state was Argentina, actually. Very random, but I believe it was being considered because its climate, it had very relaxed immigration policies, which would allow for a lot of Jews to come there, and also the population was very sparse around the country. But ultimately, Palestine was just decided because of the ancient kingdom of Judea, which is where Jews were expelled from by the Romans. So kind of the need to return to that. Also for religious reasons, a lot of Orthodox Jews didn't want to go to South America, to a random country. They wanted to go to their biblical homeland. So that was the reason. And then your second question, I think the main way that we can really facilitate conversations around this topic is learning about both sides, because I know that a lot of people, and I can speak to some people in the Jewish community, can be not as willing to see other sides of this conflict, and there are people on the other side who aren't willing to see the Jewish side of this. So I think that we really need to research both sides like I did. I tried to include as much about the argument for a Jewish state and the suffering that is happening to Palestinians. I tried to include as much of that as possible to really paint a full picture, because I think when people argue about it, they're not always informed, and I think that being informed is really crucial. Any other questions? No? Okay.
Thank you all for coming today. So you guys were missing Mary and Richard, so we'll try Friday. No, tomorrow. Tomorrow for a picture? Tomorrow's our day. Excellent. So let's try not to wear sweatshirts.